in 2008, a lot of our attention was focused on Zimbabwe, given that the elections were happening there, that Zimbabwe had sort of increasingly deteriorated into political humanitarian crisis, that there was a huge amount of violence, that there had been an almost total collapse of the rule of law. We knew that the pattern generally was that there would be a flare-up of political violence around the time of the elections. And it was in that context that there were these news reports that a ship was at outer anchorage in Durban's port, that it was carrying many cases of ammunitions and weapons, mortar bombs, mortar tubes, grenades, bullets. That consignment of arms was destined for the Zimbabwean Defence Force. It was being shipped by a Chinese parastatal. And it wasn't hard to imagine, given the context in Zimbabwe, what those weapons were going to be used for.
I was driving in my car at the time, and there was a news flash or a news report. The report was saying the vessel's here, it's got lethal weaponry on it, and it was earmarked for Zimbabwe. Immediately when I heard that report as I'm driving, once I got home, I was on my cell phone to other leaders in the organization and saying we need to do something about this thing in the context of what was happening politically in Zimbabwe at the time. Essentially, we took a decision together with the other national office bearers of the union through SMSs that SATAU act in full support and in solidarity with the workers and the people of Zimbabwe. And the essence of the campaign would be to make sure that those weapons do not arrive in that country. Essentially, the idea was to build a very quick network using the port workers in Durban, first and foremost mobilizing our own members inside the country. And then, of course, we had to be conscious about the attempts that would be made to move it on to Namibia or Mozambique, Angola, and so on.
You had the trade unions, the South African Transport Workers Union, refusing, making the announcement that they would not offload these weapons. There was demonstrations there. You had church leaders, church groups demonstrating at Durban's harbour. An urgent application was brought before the Durban High Court requesting that the permit which had been granted, the transfer of the arms, be suspended and that the arms in fact be taken into custody. It was decided that the actual applicants would be the Anglican Archbishop of KwaZulu-Natal, Reuben Phillip, and then the former head of this religious organization, Diaconia, Philip Kearney. So they acted as applicants acting in the public interest. And in fact, that order was granted late on the Friday afternoon in April 2008, which was fantastic. Unfortunately, the sheriff of Durban, in attempting to take out that order to the ship, then discovered that the ship had obviously been forewarned and they had actually taken up anchor. Their last communication was something to the effect of next stop Maputo, which was in Mozambique.
So yes, it did try Mozambique. I tried Namibia, Walvis Bay, I tried Mozambique, I tried Angola. But ultimately the important thing was that workers would not handle the cargo. But it became quite an interesting game, given the nature of the Zimbabwean issue and given what was public knowledge about the suffering and the brutality, the arrests, the detentions, the undermining of democracy, the suffering of people in general under the Mugabe regime. I think we had a lot of sympathetic people sitting in many other different places, making a contribution.
There was civil society organization in Mozambique, trade unions again refusing to offload the weapons, the ship then turning tail and traveling back down along the South African coast. Fears that the ship might dock in Namibia, civil society there protesting in Namibia, resulting in the largest sort of post-independence demonstration. In fact, the ship ultimately docked in Angola, It had construction cargo on board that had always been intended for Angola, and it needed to take on fuel and supplies for its crew. Human rights inspectors were given observer status and were able to ensure that there was no offload of the arms cargo and that there was only offload of the construction cargo. The ship then made its way back down the South African coast and it would seem then headed back to China.
One of the challenges whilst we were running the campaign was that at some point we couldn't track the vessel. And it couldn't be located on the monitoring systems. We were just saying, well, I think they put off their system. So they're just floating on the water and they've put off all their systems so that they can't be tracked, they can't be traced. So, for a few days they were wondering, where the hell is this bloody thing, But their attempts, I must say, came to nothing, because that's where being part of a global transport union organization became very useful, because the ITF has offices in London, and they could liaise directly with Lloyd's List about the status and whereabouts of this vessel, and they could then feed that information back to us here in South Africa and its affiliates across Africa. So that was a difficulty, but we were able to eventually achieve the objectives of the campaign, even though they tried to use the blacking out as a basis for finding that friendly port, but they didn't succeed.
And it wasn't so much that there was, a single consignment of arms that we would have been able to prevent. It really, I think, was about this demonstration of solidarity. Civil society, I think, within Southern Africa, signalling their sense of support, of standing together with people in Zimbabwe, but also sending a clear signal to their leaders that the policies that they were pursuing in respect to Zimbabwe was not one which was supported by civil society in this region, and they acted with their feet, whether it was refusing to offload or in their own way trying to monitor the progress of the ship. I think that was the lesson of this, was this sort of tremendous act of solidarity on the part of so many in Southern Africa.
I think justice will be done. I think Zimbabwe will return to its former glory. Yes, it appears that politics is about one man, but in reality it's about the people. And I think the people out of this experience will learn to take greater control of their social, political and economic destiny, to make sure that the institutions of democracy can actually rise to the challenge of defending it, regardless of a president or of a cabinet or whatever, so that you build strong democratic institutions to defend democracy when it's under threat. And I think that's what's fundamental. So you can have your elections every 5 years, but if you don't have the tools to defend democracy, including strong civil society and organs of people power or people's power on the ground, trade unions, and so on, you're unlikely to survive.